Welcome to the Consulting Success Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Zapersky. In this podcast, we'll dive deep into the world of elite consultants, where you'll learn the strategies, tactics, and mindset to grow a highly profitable and successful consulting business. Hey, it's Michael Zapersky, and today I'm very excited to have Scott Wagers joining us. Scott, welcome.
Hi, Mike.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. Very good. Yourself?
Yeah, doing very well. And I'm really excited to have you on today and to explore your journey. And you've been doing lots of exciting stuff has been happening in your world and building your business. But before we get into that, let's just start off and have you share what it is that you do.
Okay. Well, yeah. And in fact, that's been a question I've had to ask myself quite a lot in the course of my career. We can get into that a little bit later, but I've come to call myself an open innovation catalyst in the life sciences. Now, in practice, what that means is that I help to put together and deliver projects that are with multiple disciplines and multiple stakeholders in the life sciences, and I really try to focus and emphasize on projects that disruptive in medicine or change the future of medicine. And I have a particular focus on trying to get smaller, really innovative companies into these kind of projects because that's often a big gap. So that's really what I do.
One thing you just mentioned there, which we'll definitely want to come back to, is the gap, right? I mean, anytime you're solving a business problem or anytime you're offering a service, right, one of the best ways to figure out what you should be offering is to find the gap, to find the problem that the market or the buyer is having and focus on that. And that's what you're doing so well right now. So let's go further back, right? I mean, you started your career in internal medicine, right?
Yes, that's correct. Yes.
How did you end up going from internal medicine to growing a consulting business?
That's a really good question. Well, it really started out that I was based in the US, and then at that point, my wife, who was also a researcher, and I was a researcher and a clinician in the US, seeing patients that had lung disease and working in the intensive care unit. She wanted to move back to Europe, so I had made plans to start a career in medicine here in Europe and Belgium, where I now live. But for various cross-border work permitting issues, I was not able to take the job I had lined up in the Netherlands. So I ended up really kind of looking around, trying to find a way at a new house, baby on the way, trying to learn a new language, and I had no job. And I ended up really, which I thought at the time was a temporary measure, helping to support people put together these types of projects, mostly for grant proposals at the EU. And so I did a couple of those. They weren't successful in getting funding. And then one of the investigators from one of those came to me and said, hey, we're putting together a new program. And it happened to be in the field that I used to do research in. And I said, well, I don't know if this is what I want to do for my living. And he said, well, the coordinator was this professor that was sort of one of those people you really know in the field, right? And I said, well, but I have to get involved in this. And that was successful. So then I found myself running a 39 partner organization collaborative research project, which really absorbed all of my time. But then since then, I've become very interested in that dynamic and have sort of began to grow and build my consulting business off of that. So really, in a way, it was really got into consulting via serendipity. I've sort of had to kind of evolve and learn how to make that really fit back to what was my main original mission, which was my career, my life, which was trying to do something to improve the life and the health of patients, mostly trying to change the field and research. It took me a while. Now I'm really back in the situation.
So let's talk to me a little bit more about that, because you've been consulting now for almost 12 years, I believe. Is that right about that?
Yeah, it's about right. Yep.
Okay. Early on, and especially as you were presented with this unexpected roadblock of you moved to Europe from the US, you thought you had a job lined up that ended up not working out, right? You were in career mode, not necessarily consulting mode. And now you had to go off and figure out some other way to generate income and revenue, support your family and so forth. Going into consulting initially, did you have a lot of fears or a lot of concerns about actually becoming a consultant?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I had lots of fears, and they continued for some time in terms of, is it going to be secure? Am I going to have enough? And actually, I would say it's more than fears. It's more a long struggle with what am I doing? What value am I bringing to these projects? So it was really kind of often sort of that kind of thinking that the process I went through. I mean, I think the early days, lots of errors and mistakes in positioning myself in the wrong way or thinking about what I was doing in the wrong way and really underestimating what I was capable of, to be honest.
Right. What is the main problem that you're then really solving for your clients? You touched on that at the beginning, but how did you really arrive at where you are today in terms of identifying a big problem the market has and then building your offerings and your consulting business around that?
Yeah, I mean, well, first of all, like I described, I got involved in one of these grant projects that was successful. That sort of started it off.
Mm-hmm.
And so that kind of got me in there. But it was a question of what is my role in this? It's really a matter of, first of all, thinking, oh, I'm going to just try to do what everybody needs, right? And be like the person. But then that sort of meant that I ended up sometimes trying to struggle with the diets at a big meeting, which really wasn't something that I wanted to do. And I had moments of going, wow, what is this? What am I doing? And then it came down to, I actually realized one day that what was really interesting, the way we ran this project was we had multiple conference calls with multiple different people on the call. And that I realized one day that dynamic was a really interesting way to solve problems. So it was really kind of paying attention. And I became very interested in that dynamic, that creativity that happens. So then I started to realize that one of the big problems in these projects is that it's hard enough to do a project within your own organization. Trying to do it across 39 organizations is really quite a challenge. But yet in medicine, as we're able to approach more and more complex aspects of disease, it becomes more and more important that you have multiple people working together. And for example, I mean, all the tech fields are now actually interested in the medicine. So now you've got people who have no background trying to come in and understand and deliver new applications to solve medical problems. They've all got to kind of come together, and that's not so easy to do.
Mm-hmm.
And so I sort of, really by observation and understanding and trying to really question myself, what am I doing? I started to realize where the real need was in that sort of moderating, shepherding role of these dynamic interactions of people talking, to make sure that what happens is the projects start off and there's lots of enthusiasm, and then the enthusiasm, as soon as you walk away from the first meeting, the enthusiasm wanes. So there needs to be somebody to bring that back up and get that interaction and make sure that people are not just avoiding conflict, and that actually people are talking and making concrete progress and coming up with solutions. Otherwise, you just end up talking about the project and never doing it.
Right. What you mentioned right there about identifying what the market is looking for, right? The pain points that they have, and then figuring out how you can best connect your expertise to that is such an important insight and advice and kind of lesson that you're sharing here, Scott, because as you know, for many consultants, you kind of default to just projecting what you want to do in the marketplace or what you think is right and the way that things should be done. But often that leads to a lot of problems for consultants because that's not necessarily what the market wants. And even if it is in some way connected to what the market wants, often you're using the wrong language or the wrong messaging to describe the actual same thing. And you've done a really nice job of having a lot of conversations with people and really honing in on what they are thinking and wanting most, and then embedding that into all of your messaging.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing that probably surprised me the most about it, the whole process, is the time it takes in the iterations. It continues, right? You're still kind of learning, but I think that's also very interesting. And it's mostly about the conversations.
Mm-hmm.
I think at first I didn't do that, at least not specifically to what I was doing. And the more and more I started to talk to people or listen to the feedback, like, for example, I mean, I know some of my people I've worked with the most, when they would refer, because I had different staff, what they would say to the people that they're referring to would say, oh, make sure that I myself, Scott, is working on the project, right? And at first you're kind of, well, that's nice. But what it really meant is that the value was really that the sum total of my knowledge and experience, and being someone that's crossed over from academia, research, and medicine into the business world and into the how you set up and run projects. Mm-hmm. That's a pretty unique combination. And it just took me some time to say, oh, well, that's what I need. And really listening to what people were saying, that's what I need to focus on. And so that's kind of how I got there. And it's really a matter of listening. And I was reading recently, and I think this is something that's really interesting, is that everyone has a tendency when they start out, things they don't really know what to do on. They think they're better than they are, right? And because they don't really know what they're doing and they think they're better. And so that's a problem. But then there's the opposite, which is when you start to get better at something, you start to understand, all the potential and the things you could improve upon. And people have a tendency to underestimate how good they are at doing something. And I think I was often in that kind of situation. And so in a way, the fact that understanding how to improve the different things is actually highlighting that that's something that's unique. And what I found is that as I go through time, it's sort of like some of the things that I think are just so straightforward and simple for the people I'm working with are very difficult. They don't make sense to them. And just realizing that, right? And that's where the real value is, because if it's easy for you, difficult for your clients, that's a good thing to be working on. And
certainly, yeah. Scott, I'm just going to jump in and share, as I've watched you, you've been in our coaching program now for a little while. And really one of the things that I admire about you and that I've seen is that you take action. I mean, you get things done, right? You go from an idea, or if we talk about a strategy, and then the next time I talk with you, it's like, oh, I've already implemented this and here's what's happening and all this good stuff that has come of it. Has that always been how you approach business in life in terms of just getting things done and taking action on them quite rapidly? Or is that something that you've developed over time?
While we work with a lot of seasoned and experienced consultants here at Consulting Success, I'm often contacted by new early stage consultants. Invariably, the question I'm asked is, what are the steps I should take to become a successful consultant and grow my consulting business to my first 6 figures per year? Well, I'm excited to announce that we've opened the doors for our Momentum program. This is our most popular program for early stage consultants, and it has helped almost 1,000 consultants to start, run, and grow successful consulting businesses. It gives you the step-by-step plan to help you with your messaging, your fees, and pricing strategies, how to win more proposals, how to go to market more effectively, developing a marketing system to generate leads consistently, and so much more. And right now, until September the 19th, you can sign up for Momentum and get 50% off the regular price by going to consultingsuccess.com/audio. That's consultingsuccess.com/audio, AUDIO. Only 100 spots are available to join Momentum and get 50% off. This deal is only available until September the 19th or until all 100 spots are gone. We won't be opening up new spots in this program for several months, so don't wait. Go to consultingsuccess.com/audio. That's consultingsuccess.com/audio, AUDIO.
well, yeah, it's probably something I've developed over time. Yeah, I think to a degree I've done it for some time, because it's sort of when you're in the hospital, you're running in the ICU, you have to get things done.
Right. You can't say, well, I'm going to put it off and procrastinate for a little while there while Tony sits on the bed bleeding out.
Exactly. But the problem is that's all reactionary, right? That's sort of, it's clear what you have to do.
Right.
When you step out of that situation and now you've got to think being more proactive, right? That's where procrastination becomes a big issue, because so I've just sort of, just always trying to learn and improve on that front, and have just learned that it'll never be perfect, and that by actually starting and doing something, you actually learn a lot about it. And it's actually, you can learn things about doing it that you cannot learn just by thinking about it or planning for it. And that's actually a very scientific standpoint. Science advances from the unexpected finding.
Mm-hmm.
The planning of your experiments is what I mean. And so I think I've always had that fascination of, let's get in there, see what happens, and then change it. But it's not to say that it's easy to just taking action.
Sure. Scott, one thing, talking about kind of your approach to this, the model that you're using today is a little different than what you had before. I mean, you previously had a lot more staff at a point in time in your consulting business. You decided to create a much leaner business model. What do things look like now compared to, or, what do things look like before compared to now? Just kind of give us some of that contrast between those two and why you decided to make that shift.
Yeah. Okay. So, I think at one point I had 6 or 7 employees besides myself, right? And we had 3 or 4 or 5 grant projects. So we were actually partners in getting funding. And so I think the thing that I tried to do quite often is take some of my employees and say, oh, well, I want you to do the things I do, exactly the things I do.
Mm-hmm.
And that actually created more problems, because then I ended up having to spend a lot of my day actually managing their challenges and trying to do what I do, and actually getting nice being frustrated. And then for various reasons, the grant program that a lot of the projects were funded has shifted. So then people that we were working with were getting less grants funded. So there was less opportunity to be partners. So there was a pressure and a need to change. And I really had to kind of struggle, because I had some clients that some projects that weren't grant funded. And I really had to kind of say, okay, how can I move forward with this? I mean, there was really a moment where I was trying to decide, do I go into what's called a contract research organization? So you manage research projects using staff to do that, sort of like a clinical study.
Right.
And that's a very process-oriented type work. Or do I focus on being a consultant? And I had an advisory panel, and they was really good at setting up CROs and really kind of thought about it. But then I realized that, as I mentioned earlier, I really like this idea of integrating and moderating and getting that creativity out of a group of diverse experts and stakeholders as sort of a method, as an approach. And then just realized that that's more of a consulting aspect.
Right.
And also just sort of the realization that if I really focused on what I did, had less staff, the business could run a lot easier and be much more comfortable. And the other key was this focusing, not having staff do what I do, but focus on doing things that I'm not good at.
Mm-hmm.
And that seems to have worked extremely well. And
right. One of the things that we've been working on, right, in addition to getting a process in place to generate more leads and create more conversations with your ideal clients consistently, is really creating more scale and more leverage, productization, right, with your new leaner business model. Why is that so important to you, and how has that helped in terms of shifting from all this that you had before to really getting much more lean and creating more leverage and scale with productization?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's been really important, mostly from the fact that it makes it simpler. It makes it easier to emphasize and focus on the value that I can bring, right? So before we would kind of say, oh yeah, we'll do everything, right, that you need. Now it's sort of, we have a process, and I can say, okay, we have this, someone wants us to develop this project. Then we set up, and we have now a number of structured set of calls that we arrange. And then we can actually now put into my time, in the hard schedule in my calendar, to just what I need to do before and after the calls, which then makes it all quite automatic. And that's been great. It's also more focusing on that. I think job satisfaction for me has gone, that's one of the biggest impacts I've seen, because I'm no longer, like I said, when I started, I was struggling with arranging the diets for the different people at the meeting. And it's sometimes more draining, but it's more what I want to do. It's about helping people think through different projects and develop new creative solutions to problems. It is hard to kind of tell yourself what you do, what you focus on, and then try to say no to other stuff or have other people do the other things. But it's everything.
Scott, as you think about the growth of your consulting business, what is one mistake that stands out that you made? A great learning experience now, but maybe just looking back that you didn't see coming, or that just appeared. Maybe now you can see it very clearly and it was a great learning experience, but back then it just was something that hit you. Aside from building the business where you had 6 full-time employees and everything that you just shared, what other kind of big mistake learning experience can you offer?
Yeah, it's probably hard to make a choice, but I think the biggest one to offer is that when you're a consultant, you're not there just to say yes to whatever they think and or want. And actually, sometimes you have to be confrontational and or stand your ground on certain issues. And that not every client is the best client for you, right? That's all kind of the same kind of thing.
Great advice, definitely.
And that's the thing I think I've learned. And it's the difference between being outsourced resource versus a consultant, right? A consultant makes recommendations and advice, and then outsources there to be supervised by the people who are paying for you. And I think that's the biggest thing. And sometimes it's a bit weird because you think, oh, I'm confronting these people. But actually, if they're the right client, they'll thank you for it. And that's actually what they're paying you for, is to challenge them.
100%. That's exactly right. They're coming to you for a reason, right? You have something that they don't have. Otherwise, they wouldn't be spending their time having a conversation with you, never mind actually paying money to you. So they're looking to be challenged. I mean, most people sit with challenges and problems and plateaus in their business or in their lives for way too long. Sometimes thinking about what they could do and exploring all kinds of different directions in their mind or possible solutions, but they hold off taking action because there's some fear within them, the unknown, whatever it might be that's holding them back from ultimately getting the result that they want. And so your job, right, as the consultant, the advisor, the guide, is to help them to overcome that. And sometimes you do, as you just mentioned very well, Scott, there, right, is you have to challenge them. You have to push back a little bit at times to help them to see things a little bit differently, and done in a way that really encourages them, supports them, helps them to take that leap of faith or to take that action that they've been holding off on by themselves or in their current situation. So yeah, I can't just stress how important that is. And I'm really glad that you brought that up. You've been having a lot of success, Scott, in creating conversations with ideal clients, winning new business, putting proposals out there that get accepted, creating a really big pipeline of opportunities. Like you just share with me some before we jumped onto the podcast here, some just really big, good stuff that's going on. What makes your approach so successful?
Well, I think the first instance is really kind of having iterated and kind of reflecting back the ideal client's language and understanding the problem, right? I think also being able to get on and demonstrate that specialized knowledge that I have, right? And I'm not saying that everybody, even if you're starting out, I think everybody has more knowledge or skills than they realize they have. Mm-hmm. But it's sort of being able to, when you have the conversation, be focused on just having the conversation and really asking questions in the first part. And then they actually, through asking questions, actually getting them to realize that you have value you can add. And I think it's also some deal about referrals and reputation as well. But it's also about just, and I think the biggest thing that's been a transformation for me is not worrying about the people that don't respond or the people that respond negatively, or it's really a numbers game, right? And that there are ideal clients out there. You've just got to find them and resonate with them. And sitting and doing nothing is not going to get you there.
Yeah. Well, you definitely have a good process in place right now. You're constantly creating conversations and continue to feed your pipeline with opportunities. I'm very excited to continue watching your progress and growth and success to come here, Scott. I want to thank you so much for coming on. For those that want to learn more about your work and to connect with you, what's the best place for them to go to?
Well, probably the best place is LinkedIn, right? So profile Scott Wagers. Well, I also have my webpage, which is biopsyconsulting.com. And yeah, I mean, reach out on LinkedIn or through a contact form on the website, and happy to connect and interact with anybody.
Perfect. We'll include all that in the show notes. Just go to consultingsuccess.com, type in Scott Wagers, and you'll find this episode with obviously the audio, but also the full transcript and links to everything that Scott just mentioned so that you can reach out to him. Scott, I want to thank you again so much for coming on here today.
No, thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Consulting Success Podcast. For more episodes and to subscribe, rate, and leave a review, head on over to iTunes. And if you'd like to develop consistent lead flow and a highly profitable consulting business, learn more about our coaching programs at consultingsuccess.com.